Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here at this week's episode of the Market Monday. Of course, Pro Tour Amonkhet was over this weekend, but I'm actually going to talk about two topics in this Market Monday, being Pro Tour Amonkhet the main focal point, and then there was something else that was significant that happened over this past week, which was the 1v1 Commander Leagues that were released on MTGO, and I have been playing those to death. And they're very broken right now. Blue is overpowered, but if you are an MTGO investor, I think the bubble is about to, not the bubble, but the supply is about to burst to the demand. And we're going to see a lot of prices go up in value that have to do with the 1v1 league. I do caution everyone because I do think an upcoming ban is going to occur in 1v1 Commander, and I think it's going to be very similar to a lot of the cards that are banned in Legacy. So we're talking about the blue draw spells and some of the broken cards that I have no clue why they're actually legal in 1v1 Commander. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but right now let's focus on the Pro Tour Amonkhet. So as you may know, Zombies took it down, but the breakout deck was really the Aetherworks Marvel. Aetherworks Marvel was everywhere, and I highly suggest to go read two articles. One is on the Mothership by the Pro Tour Amonkhet by the numbers. So the standard metagame breakdown, and then on MTG Goldfish, go read Seth's article, Pro Tour Amonkhet by the numbers. Both those will break down the conversion rates and how well these decks did against what sort of matchups. The biggest change to Pro Tour Amonkhet is people dropped the heavier mid-range or just heavier like permanent-based Aetherworks Marvel and went to a more spells-based Aetherworks Marvel. A good video to explain this is actually if you go search up Channel Fireball, LSV talks about the new standard. I disagree with some things that he says in his video, but I think he is spot on to why some of the decks did so well at the Pro Tour, or some of the Marvel decks did so well, and the other Marvel decks, the kind of the stock list, did so bad, and why Mardu vehicles just got completely stomped. And I kind of, my intro to this whole standard season after the ban kind of even really beat home that Mardu was terrible against Aetherworks Marvel. Kind of the rock, paper, scissors. I called it a rock, paper, scissors, bomb, and cockroach strategy. And cockroach was my zombies pick, that it came in and beat the bomb decks. And it's kind of funny how it all played out. That Mardu Vehicles was the #1 played deck at the Pro Tour, but it was more amateurs than pros that were on the deck. And then the Aetherworks Marvel was the #2 base deck, and then Zombies was close, not too far behind with all the zombie archetypes. So Aetherworks Marvel probably performed better as a whole than Zombies. It did have more top 8 finishes. It did have a higher win percentage, especially the Chandra Flamecaller, or the more spell version of the deck. And that was really the breakout card for Aetherworks Marvel, was the Chandra Flamecaller. So we're going to see this card spike up in value. It already is increasing up to $6. Hopefully you can ride the spike, and as soon as that goes, it hits its plateau, maybe around $8, $9, I think it's the time to sell that card. So I hope you've been watching my Market Monday videos, because the pick was Aetherworks Marvel and Torrential Gearhulk a couple weeks back when we focused on Standard, and both of those went up a ton after I told to spec into them. So we're going to try to see where we're at now and what cards I think and what decks I think have potential. So to do so, we just really have to break down the entire what Standard is going to look like. So right now, with the Pro Tour Amonkhet, you can see that a lot of the things in the 8 wins or better, the only one with 9 wins actually that didn't make the top 8 was a Teamer Aetherworks, but there's a lot of Aetherworks, there's a lot of mono black zombies, and a few other decks that just, yeah, basically just, that's it. That's Marty Vehicles only had 2 that 8 wins or better. When you go over into 7 wins, it does have a lot of Marty Vehicles to just, and some of these might have actually missed just because they might have done poorly in Limited, for example. But then a lot of mono black zombies, a lot of Aetherworks Marvel. So it does look like that we have really funneled down to just a few different archetypes. You can put them into Mardu Vehicles, the Marvel decks, the zombie variants, either if it's can be black-white zombies or mono-black zombies, and then the Torrential Gearhulk decks. And then I have a few decks like in the mix every now and again. You'll see like the green-red energy and the white-green tokens But other than that, we are starting to see more of a very fine-tuned standard. So hopefully that's not a sign to come, because standard could get quite boring if that's the case. But I do think there's a lot of room for innovation that can beat these type of archetypes. So there's a couple decks that really do stand out to me, and I think they're the two archetypes that I am going to focus on, maybe play test and see if they do. I'm predicting that these two type of decks are going to really start coming out of the woodwork, and then when they start doing well, then we might see some other decks that are just better at beating them come out of the woodwork again, and we might have a standard that is very reminiscent of the Innistrad and Return to Ravnica days. And that was such a fun standard because there was a top deck literally almost every day, and then that top deck would be beat, and then that'd go away for a while, and then there'd be another deck that'd be the top dog, and then that'd go away, and then there'd be another one. And it was so kind of like a self-regulating standard. And it was incredibly fun. It was great for investors because it just meant that no one could stay consistent on a deck. They are always buying cards. And so when the market is active, that's the time then when prices go up. I think the worst for one of the standards why it was so cheap during the Saheeli combo and Marty vehicles is people just stuck with one of those decks and quit investing in cards. We actually saw Saheeli, which was a 4-of Planeswalker. The only time we've seen such a dominance of a Planeswalker in the last, since I can remember, is probably Jace the Mind Sculptor, and that hit $100, and Saheeli could barely break 15. And I mean, we've seen some other Planeswalkers here and there, of course, before us. Gideon's been very dominant since its inception into Standard. But anyway, so there's two decks that I really, really like that I think has game versus both Temur Aetherworks and Zombies. The first one is White-Black Control. I really like this list by Alex Stock. I think it can be a little more fine-tuned, though. I think it's got game versus both the Zombies, has really good game versus Zombies, and also can take out the Aetherworks Marvel with cards like Transgress the Mind and Pick the Brain. Lay Bare is also another card that could easily just be put in the main because it's never a dead card versus many matchups. For example, on turn 2, you can always just rip out a Diregraph Colossus, or one of the Lords against Zombies, and you can still have a chance for that game 1. Game 2, when the sideboard comes in, this deck becomes a lot better when it has access to even more board wipes. What was really striking, though, was it ran 3 Flaying Tendrils in the main, and these work very well versus both Marvel and Zombies because Flaying Tendrils wipes all of the Whirler Virtuoso tokens as well as the Rogue Refiners. And you got to remember that the alternate win condition off Aetherworks Marvel is just to grind your opponent out with the Rogue Refiners and the Whirler Virtuosos. I have ran Marvel quite significantly for the past couple weeks in different variants, and Ulamog does win a lot. I was shaking my head so much over the Pro Tour that the first spins were finding Ulamogs like crazy because I can never get an Ulamog, I swear, every time I spin an Aetherworks Marvel. But that's neither here nor there. But anyway, the Flaying Tendril is great at just clearing those Rogue Refiners, clearing those Servant of the Conduits, and clearing at least all the Whirler Virtuoso tokens, and taking that aspect of winning away from the Marvel, making that they have to rely on trying to get the Ulamog. And then this deck has access to like Lost Legacy. I'm surprised Dispossess is not in there, or Transgress the Mind. And so they can just rip out those win cons, and then just it's clear sailing after that. If they don't have the other alternate way to win. We heard from Jerry Thompson that he didn't like bringing in Lost Legacy or Dispossess in his matchups versus Marvel because it was kind of like a lose-lose scenario. You're taking away your speed as Zombies to try to rip out something that Marvel is doing, and then they beat you down with Whirler Virtuoso tokens, and you're behind a turn, and then you can never just have that explosive draw that you want. This deck is different, though. This deck is not trying to even get any sort of aggression on the board, and it stabilizes with lifelink cards like Gifted Aetherborn and Kalatos, Trader of Get. I'm thinking that this deck might have some room with Eiley. In my testings against Zombie, Eiley and Gifted Aetherborn together were so good. They're both 2/3s. And they both have Death Touch, so they can trade with anything. So they're really good versus all of, like the green-red energy decks. If they had to waste a Harness Lightning on it, then sure, they've used their turn for that, so it's really done its job. If not, then they have to trade. Even like a Bristling Hydra has to trade with a Gifted Aetherborn or an Eiley. But in this case, Gifted Aetherborn is incredibly good because of the synergy with the Flaying Tendrils. So I really like this as the go-to deck to really combat Aetherworks Marvel and zombies, and it has some decent game versus the rest of the decks. I don't think it's tuned at all for the Mardu. I think Mardu will be very good against this deck if they continue to play it, but the problem with Mardu is it's both bad versus the way they have it built right now with running Fatal Push over Magma Spray and running Unlicensed Disintegration is it actually has a poor matchup versus zombies. Now, Mardu vehicles can be tuned to have a good matchup versus zombies, but as is, it's just not getting there. I think it had zombies had like a 58% win percentage versus Mardu, which is significant. It's 8% higher than even. Whereas the Aetherworks Marvel just stomped the Mardu decks. So yeah, I mean, it could be a problem if Mardu comes back, but right now, as is, with all of the zombies, with all of the Aetherworks Marvels, going forward, I really, really think this deck is the way to go. A lot of main board removal that means that you will have a game versus all those other decks out of left field that might be running creature-based decks. It's going to have answers versus the combo-based decks like the new Perspectives, as you can just rip it out with Lost Legacy and the Transgress the Mind, and it's going to have game versus all the other mid-range decks because it does have high-impact cards like Sorin and Gideon to just really take over the game. It's got the card draw with Live Fast. It's got the Never Return that gives you multiple uses. This is extremely good versus, again, the other Planeswalker-based decks because the Never can destroy a Planeswalker and then get back a 2/2 black zombie. Especially if they're using something like Scrapheap Scrounger, you can exile it and be gone with it. And the cast outs are just such a versatile card to really, against anything again. It can take care of, you name it. It can actually take care of Ulamog. No Anguish and Makings in the sideboard, and I think the Anguish and Makings could easily be put in a deck like this as well, as you do have a lot of lifelink with the Gifted Aetherborns, the Kalatos, the Linvala, and even with the Shambling Vents in the sideboard. So this would be my go-to deck if I were going to be playing the whole reason I ran a very similar deck to this because we have a lot of zombies in my local meta, and between the Fatal Push, Grasp of Darkness, Gifted Aetherborn, Kalatos, the zombies just couldn't push through, and then I'd be able to stabilize. So, yeah, I think that if it becomes more mid-range, Gonti could be higher in the main or the sideboard. I've ran a list like this that had 4 Gontis in the main, and Gideons were in the side because Gideon sometimes with this particular list just doesn't do a lot. I mean, you get a Gideon established and you can't really protect it that well, and it feels like just a bad turn 4 versus like Green-Red Energy and a few of those other, like the Glorybringer type decks, whereas Gonti is always pretty solid because it's always going to at least draw you a card and then force an Exert trigger off of like a Glorybringer. But this deck is usually pretty good versus Glorybringer anyway because of the Grasp of Darkness, and like I said, you can actually have access to cards like the Bear of the Heart, whatever the card's called, kind of the Transgress type cards that they can rip out those win cons. So the other deck I want to kind of focus on is the blue-red control. However, I disagree that red should be this go-to. This is good versus like humans, good versus I guess zombies to a point, but it had such a terrible matchup versus zombies in the long run because none of it really exiled the zombies and it just ground them out. The Dread Wanderer and the Scrapheap Scrounger, and even to a point the Relentless Dead just kept putting on the pressure. And it was just too much for the UR control to really... this deck was good versus, I believe, the white-black zombies list, but did terrible versus just the mono-black. So if you switch over to black, then you get all of the oomph that black has, and then you have the kind of game versus the Marvel and game versus the other combo-based decks, and nothing can get past when you can rip out the hand with... the Transgress the Minds and the Dispossesses and the Lost Legacies, and then keep up counter magic for everything else. So I think the Torrential Gearhulk going forward, people should go back to trying to find the black version. And there are some sweet cards you can get from black that meld pretty well. I like all the Cycle lands with you can run both the white one and the black-blue one, of course, would fit in that archetype. And it does take away kind of the Wandering Fumarals other way, but so many times when I've played Torrential Gearhulk and you're running Wandering Fumaral, it actually makes all of the removal that is just naturally in their decks actually relevant. So the Fatal Pushes and the Grasp of Darknesses actually have targets. Whereas if you don't have a man land, then you don't get punished for, trying to activate it and whatnot. But I think that I think that red has very little to offer at this point. Harness Lightning is really good versus it scales well, but I don't think there's really a deck right now you need to scale. I think that you just need to, versus the Marvel, it's better just to have more efficient removal early to take care of Rogue Refiners or whatnot. And then having access to like the Flaying Tendrils is just, I think, just a better sweeper in general than the Sweltering Suns. The only thing that Sweltering Suns kills at the moment that Flaying Tendrils doesn't would be the Whirler Virtuoso itself. But, I mean, the tokens are the problem, not really the Whirler Virtuoso. So I think going forward, we're going to see some innovation with the Torrential Gearhulk deck, more with the black. White could also go in here because white does have Fumigate, which does very well against zombies. As well as Cast Out that can do at least have some sort of game versus the combo. Apparently this deck also got stomped by the spell heavy or the Chandra heavy Aetherworks Marvel. And again, black, that's where black, it covers up all of the holes in this sort of strategy that the red doesn't give you. I mean, you're not going to run any of these. You're not going to run Thing in the Ices or Dynavolt Towers or Glorybringers versus the Aetherworks Marvel. You're just setting yourself up to lose to that particular strategy. And then some other combo decks can just slip through as well. Whereas if you bring in black, black has that Lost Legacy and Dispossess that are just basically I win buttons. Versus Marvel, if you eat out their Ulamog, they're not going to be able to really, or their Chandra, they're not going to be able to really have any way to beat you down. Whirler Virtuosos and Rogue Refiners are not going to do it. So those are the two decks I would focus on. And yeah, I think the Torrential Gearhulk's going to have a comeback. It did poor at the Pro Tour. I think Mardu is going to slightly have a comeback because I still think Mardu is kind of like the Jund of Standard, whereas maybe the Abzan is the better reference, because if you look at like the most consistent deck against the mass decks in Modern, Abzan is it. And Abzan is never really, I don't think, has it even won a Pro Tour. It usually doesn't even do well at like Grand Prix. You don't ever see it like winning a Grand Prix or winning a Pro Tour. Well, they don't do Pro Tour Moderns anymore anyway, but Abzan is very consistent as well as being what we call 55% deck. It's going to be good against the vast majority. It's going to have game versus everything, and it can win versus the combos, versus the aggro, versus the control, versus other mid-range decks. So I think Mardu is kind of the safe route if you're looking just for like a rock-solid deck to play. So I'm thinking we're going to see some comeback. So where does that leave with Market Monday? You just have to be ahead of the trends. Just go over and always look at the movers and shakers here, or what's better here is you just go over the metagame. And you can see the flavor of the day here would be the white-black zombies. So not any black mono-black zombies even in here, because the white-black zombies does very well against it does better against Aetherworks Marvel, and it does better against mono-black zombies than it's the mirror of mono-black, and mono-black does against either of those. So yeah, I just keep checking this, and if prices take, like I'm expecting a huge tank on the Torrential Gearhulk just because it didn't have a very good showing, and if it goes back down again under 15, I think I'm going to pull the trigger on that, because that's a card that I would personally target just because it has the most life in Standard. As far as all these cards that did move up in value, if you come over here like Relentless Dead and Ulamogs, the time is now to unload. Unload them. I sold all mine during the Pro Tour. All the like Relentless Deads and Ulamogs, even though I use Ulamogs, all of those I would unload Chandra Flamecaller. If this price trend continues to increase, which it probably will, usually this will continue up probably twice as much. So $9 is probably right with Chandra when all the people decide to kind of mimic. We do have game day coming up, so that might actually have a lot of people actually purchasing cards. And Chandra Flamecaller, it's time to get out of all of these cards that are going to be rotating, because the rotation is sooner than later. And as far as the market is concerned, it's tomorrow. That's when right now all of the vendors will just start to be unloading everything from Shadows for Innistrad and Battle for Zendikar blocks, just because there's not enough time for any of that to appreciate in value. And so, yeah, just unload on all of these cards that have spiked up. The Diregraph Colossuses, the Relentless Deads, the Ulamogs, the Chandra Flamecallers, all of those need to go immediately and start trying to reinvest in cards that have potential of being the next rotation breakout cards. What is keeping back a particular strategy at the moment what's going to maybe come out of the, not this next set, but the next set after rotation that could make a particular archetype or deck better. Now, people would say, well, Zombies has another set from Amonkhet. Hour of Devastation will probably have Zombies, so that could actually lead to another spike. But I think that there's not a lot of gain that a lot of these Zombies can actually go any further. We've seen like the Tireless Tracker and the Sylvan Advocate type effect, that those cards have a hard time getting above 7, and $5 is more likely. Like the dominance at one point that Sylvan Advocate had, and it couldn't break that $5 barrier. This is what you're seeing with Crypt Breaker. It just won a Pro Tour, but yet it's going down just because it's a rare out of a heavily open set. Alrighty, so that was the kind of the first topic. Again, what I really suggest you do is just read up on these articles. I think they're very well done with just the breakdowns here of what decks did, like the conversion rates of the decks. I think this black-green tokens deck actually had 100% conversion. I was going to look at that deck because it's very similar to the deck that I used to run back in the day. Other than I kind of shake my head at some of their choices. Their one-drops being Loam Dryad and the Blister Pod compared to the one-drops that I found to be more efficient with Crypt Breaker and Ovia. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I'll talk about that in another day. Maybe we'll revisit the black-green tokens. I actually think black-green tokens is in a terrible spot because one of the very worst matchups for it was Aetherix Marvel. And sometimes you could push through a Marvel, but it probably does very well against Zombies. However, the second thing I want to talk about is this Commander 1 versus 1 format. Now, like I said, it has a lot of work to do. I've played this to the death in the past few weeks. I've been playing Teysa. I've been playing the Mina and the red-green commander that's basically playing extra land per turn in a land destruction deck, and I've been playing Breya, but a non-blue Breya is what I like to call it. I'm not a fan of a lot of counterspell, that type of list. I like Breya in more of a mid-range type strategy. But definitely the way to go, if you can see, if you look over here, is the way to go is Tasigur and Barl. These two I'm thinking are going to be banned in the next updated ban list. I think the Tasigur is banned in all other 1 versus 1. If you go in Leviathan or the dual commander, Tasigur is banned. And if you play this format, you can see why, because they always cast Tasigur for 1, and it's just too efficient, especially with cards like Upheaval. It just really puts this card over the top, and it's hard to win. When you have access to green as well for just running, the only thing they usually run for green is just Abrupt Decay and Life from the Loam. Just because Abrupt Decay is kind of a card that can answer everything, and then Life from the Loam is the Strip Mine combo. So I'm thinking Strip Mine's going to be banned. I'm thinking a lot of the pieces out of blue, like Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise, are going to be banned. But this format does have a lot of potential. It seems like a lot of people are playing it. Like when you queue up, it even though it says there's only 160 players or whatnot in the league, it queues up pretty fast. So it's showing that people are re-queuing and playing the death out of this format. It was very cheap to get into, but I'm thinking that the price of these decks are going to go up substantially. So as you can see, you can still get in for some of these for 400 tickets. But yeah, I'm thinking I really like the idea of singleton formats. I think that if there was a way to do this in standard or modern, it'd be a lot more fun just because of if you go clear back in Legacy Vintage, there's some really busted cards that didn't see the first banning that aren't even legal in Legacy but are legal in this format. But it is insanely fun. And if this does hit standard, if this does hit paper, this does catch on paper, we could see some price increases on some key cards, some key staples to this 1 versus 1 format. One of them being Wasteland. Wasteland I don't think will be banned because it's the more fair version. As you can see, that in the dual commander, both Leviathan and dual commander, Zergo Bellstriker and other aggro decks are a lot more of the meta, and you can basically see that it's all control. Even these decks here, which I think this one actually is where's the other commander that goes with this? It's a creature. The Vial Smasher. The Vial Smasher is kind of like an aggro, but it's more of like a control temple-based deck. You see it with Keranos as well, that they just finish you off with Vial Smasher and then just completely control the board. And there's some really cool interactions. And this, if you look at any of these cards, let's just click on like True Name Nemesis, for example. right after the league was started, this card has just had a substantial gain. And you can see this with basically all of the staples in this particular league. I would say that probably even Him to Torak might be going up. Nope, it's still... So it's kind of weird with online, because online prices, it's a self-regulating market, meaning that whenever a card starts to spike up, they can just put it in the treasure, and then that will decrease the value. So you always, if you're going to invest in MTGO, I always sell when high. So if I see a price spike, I immediately sell it, because it's going to go down in a few weeks. It's inevitably going to do so because of just the way that MTGO works. But yeah, cards like Sylvan Library, yep, there we go. That's a perfect example. It's starting to trend up, and this isn't because of Legacy. This is because of the 1 versus 1 league. This is a staple in every green deck. Basically, every green deck will run it. Do they have a breakdown yet for format staples? No, they don't. This is something I hope that Goldfish will compile. It's just a breakdown. As you can see that it's very similar. Most of the decks have very similar cards for like the Jit. Jit's another one that's played in almost every deck. I'm surprised this hasn't started to spike up. And some of the swords and whatnot. So keep your eye out on this 1 versus 1 format. I'll be playing some more. I keep saying I've sworn off playing it on MTGO until they do some bans, because it is like the Barrel and the Tasker decks, they lock you out on turn 2. Pretty much after turn 2 is established, they're just going to counter everything. So if you're not playing blue, it's really impossible to compete because of access like cards like Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise and other ways to refill your hand, and then you just counter everything. But it is fun though when I don't play against blue decks. My go-to decks of Teysa. Teysa is really, really powerful, and I'll have to show that deck tech coming up. But anyway, I'm rambling with this Market Monday. For this week though, I think that this is be where I'm really focused. I've bought like a one of almost every staple out of the MTGO, and they've all gone up. I'm pretty sure like all of these dual lands will start to go back up, and that's where I'd put my money if it is a lot more risky in MTGO. Like I said, the market is a lot more volatile, but I'm actually, it's a lot easier to buy and sell and actually take less of a cut, like less of a fee, I would say. So if you go right to a bot, I mean, I guess if you cash out though of tickets, you will have to take like an eBay cut, or I don't know how people sell tickets, but if you go to a bot, the price that a bot buys a card and a price the bot sells a card is usually razor thin, and it's crazy how easy it is just to spec on MTGO and have a pretty significant gains. So anyway, if that's something you're interested in, I might do a separate video. I don't know if people like them separate or together in the same Market Monday video. I'll kind of show you my strategies of how I invest in MTGO. Some of my best specs ever have been exclusively MTGO. Like I've specced into them in MTGO, and they'd never really made a ton in paper at the time. I like to always quote the Stony Silence. I bought it at 5 cents a piece and sold them at $2 on MTGO, and I just bought hundreds upon hundreds, but 5 cents a piece. And it fed me on MTGO. It kept my account active and brewing rogue decks for like a whole year of being able to splurge on MTGO because of the profit margin that I was able to do with that spec. So anyway, I'd like to know your comments in the comment section below of what you think about the 1 versus 1 Commander League as well as the standard metagame. If there is something that I missed going forward, if you don't think that my particular picks for decks I think are going to go up in value. I really like Gonti as a long-term spec. I think Gonti's back down to 50 cents. I like second sets. Isn't Gonti out of a second set? Maybe I should check it right now to see if I'm... Yes, it is out of Aether Revolt. So, no, okay, maybe not. Okay, Gonti is out of Kaladesh. Kaladesh is weird because I think that this set has... If you see like Toolcraft Exemplar is still around 85 cents, 75 cents, which is crazy because it was a 4 of and a tier 1 deck for so long. But I think that maybe out of the black-white, we should look at like cards out of the black-white archetype, see if I can find that again, that are exclusively out of a set that has time to go up. So these Gifted Aetherborns are kind of cool. These could actually spike up. These could be your next like $1, $2 uncommon cards. But it doesn't look like there's a lot of things right now that are investable for the future. A lot of these are rotating when this goes out, but keep your eye on these two archetypes especially. I think that if they do hit, they are going to be pretty good and dominant until their counter decks start being played. And I'm hoping that I'm right. I'm hoping this is a self-regulating standard, and we can have a lot of good standard tournaments for the next 3-4 months until our Devastation Prince Nickel Bulls and it gets broken. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this Market Monday. This has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Thanks for watching.